the long weekend for most people in the US. It was a long weekend for TikTok engineers and policy people and everybody else associated with that company. So let's start there, Ben, as you surf TikToks and enjoy your freedom. We'll start with a TikTok alert that went to users who tried opening the app on Saturday night. The company told users that, quote, a law banning TikTok has been enacted in the U.S. Unfortunately, that means you can't use TikTok for now. We are fortunate that President Trump has indicated that he will work with us on a solution to reinstate TikTok once he takes office. And then President Trump himself on Sunday morning, I'm not going to read the entire Truth Social post, but he said in part, I'm asking companies not to let TikTok stay dark. I will issue an executive order on Monday to extend the period of time before the law's prohibitions take effect so that we can make a deal to protect our national security. The order will also confirm that there will be no liability for any company that helped keep TikTok from going dark before my order. Americans deserve to see our exciting inauguration on Monday, as well as other events and conversations.
I didn't realize that the inauguration was being exclusively shown on TikTok.
I was going to say they may have more options if they're just determined to see President Trump's address. But Sunday afternoon, TikTok, a new message to users. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience and support. As a result of President Trump's efforts, TikTok is back in the U.S. So that's where we are. We're recording on Sunday night in the United States. What interests you about how this has come together so far and what might come next for TikTok?
I need more than a what interests me, Andrew. What interests you? What's your take? I need you're warmed up. You disavowed your Washington Commanders fandom.
Yep.
Is this downstream from just being disgusted with Washington in general?
I would say the disgust is nearing an all-time high here. I'm feeling pretty deflated as we head into President Trump's inauguration on Monday. What interests me, there are two legal subplots as we go forward here. Number one, President Trump says he's going to use an executive order to give TikTok the extra 90 days to divest. He almost certainly can't satisfy the requirements to grant an extension, at least that's consistent with the underlying law that Congress passed.
The law does allow for a 90-day extension, but that's if like a sale is in place and it just sort of needs to be consummated.
Right. Yeah. I can read the text for people if anybody's curious. With respect to a foreign adversary-controlled application, the president may grant a one-time extension of not more than 90 days if the president certifies to Congress that A, a path to executing a qualified divestiture has been identified. So essentially, a company is going to buy TikTok. B, evidence of significant progress toward executing such qualified divestiture has been produced with respect to such application. And C, there are in place the relevant binding legal agreements to enable execution of such qualified divestiture during the period of such extension. So, number one, I'm very curious to see how President Trump tries to represent his effort to grant a 90-day extension. And does he make any representations to Congress? Or is this going to be sort of a separate executive order that he tries to execute?
Don't look at the name, Andrew. It's Truth Social. If that's not a binding legal agreement, then I don't know what it is.
Speaking of feeling deflated, as I was prepping for the show, I had to go seek out Truth Social, and I was thinking to myself, oh God, am I going to be like on Truth Social and transcribing Truth Social posts for the next 4 years of my life as I host this podcast and Sharp China? The answer is probably yes. So in any event, I don't know what Trump is trying to do. The other interesting question, assuming Trump doesn't have the ability to just nullify federal laws via executive order, the extent to which the other companies in TikTok's tech stack are willing to just completely disregard the law and the liabilities that it imposes on companies who now illegally host TikTok data will be really interesting. It looks like Oracle is playing ball and Apple and Google are not as we record this, but maybe that story will change over the coming days.
Yeah, the other company involved is Akamai, which is a CDN network. So basically, any of these apps or anything that operates at scale. I mean, we deal with CDNs with Passport, like any that operates or Trajectory. Any that operates at
Mm-hmm.
scale has to be on a CDN, which basically a content delivery network that spreads the content around. It's closer to the user. It's more easily accessible. No one centralized server could scale in that regard. So it's basically like a
Okay.
scaling service is the way to think about it. So yeah, so Cisco and Akamai are turned back on. TikTok is still not available in the Apple and Google app stores. Yeah, I mean, I think the depression is there's an aspect where no one, I think, is totally surprised by
Mm-hmm.
what's going on here. The transparency with which this appears to be a make me look good with all the young folks seems fairly obvious.
Right.
At the same time, not to get political, probably not particularly helpful that the previous administration is like tweeting new amendments to the Constitution last week. Like there's a bipartisan breakdown in any sort of abiding by the rule of law, and maybe that's almost the bigger, more interesting sort of bit here, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we talk about Trump in being sort of a political, what's the word I'm looking for? It's similar to
So many
Genius, like
words
someone,
come to mind.
yeah, but like just the degree to which he tends to be in touch with sort of the gestalt, as it were, right?
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes that seems wildly inappropriate and out of place, and then you fast forward a couple years and it's like received wisdom, conventional, like this is the way it is.
Yep.
And it's interesting because there's been an underground sort of discussion and thinking and talk about. No one denies that our current system is very sort of sclerotic and sort of stuck in place, and basically living in, the last real overhaul of government was arguably like FDR in the Great Depression, and
Mm-hmm.
that just the massive expansion of the federal government, the sort of real shift in power, the establishment of the bureaucracy and the shift in power of the bureaucracy. And there's stuff that Trump talks about that we've talked about that ties into this, right? Like the US in the 18th century was funded by tariffs. How was that possible? Because they did national defense and like trade, and like that was it, right? Like now you have this massive bureaucracy, and the wide run effects are huge and underrated, right? Like right
Yeah.
now you have these challenges with China, like we've talked about in the context of trade, but China is massively imbalanced in favor of sort of exports. They have all these subsidies and things that used to go to real estate that don't go there anymore, that now go into building electric vehicles or solar panels or sort of whatever it might be, these relatively large ticket items. You have all these small players that have fled China thanks to the tariffs that Trump originally put in and Biden kept in place, that have gone to other Asian countries, have gone to Mexico, things like that. And you have this sort of, the US, meanwhile, is this consumer market that just inhales everything from everywhere, some of which goes back to things like Social Security. You go back to like
Mm-hmm.
FDR and this idea that, yeah, just spend today, it's fine, you'll be taken care of tomorrow. And whether that's true or not, it is very much the American psyche that you live in the present and you take out credit and it'll all sort of take care of itself in the long run. And so this is the world we've been living in. And there's been talk, is this world ending? Is there a case? A lot of the things about Doge and all those bits and pieces are all about, actually, we need to reestablish executive control of the bureaucracy. All these sorts of things have taken on a life of their own. They're doing what they want. And actually, it's the executive branch. The executive, i.e. the president, should be in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And in this sort of sense, this shift, is this sort of what we're getting is Trump kind of acting like a king. It's
It
like,
vests a lot
I'm
of power in the executive, I'll tell you that much, and that's perhaps dangerous as we move
guess
forward
what?
here.
The American people want TikTok, and I want to make deals. And so, yeah, we're going to have some sort of fig leaf and make this attestation for the 90-day thing or whatever it might be. And what are you going to do? Are you like, the answer is like the legalistic answer is Congress I would assume holds him in contempt of Congress, right? Like, and what does that mean?
Do
Does that mean
they?
impeachment? Does that
Is
mean?
the question? Yeah, I don't know whether they do. Tom Cotton
Of
seems pretty
course
worked
they
out about
don't.
it.
Of
Yeah.
course they don't.
Well,
Me
they're not
saying
going to
it.
do that, but are they going to hold Trump accountable and at least publicly attack his posture on some of these issues? That is an open question. At least early on, Tom Cotton doesn't seem like he's, bending over here. He's ready to continue at least attempting to enforce the law.
Yeah, I think that is, this is going to be the conflict to watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Yes, both houses of Congress are controlled by Republicans, but what the oldest fight in Washington is sort of like the legislative prerogative versus the president. And a Republican senator, even though it's the same party, is also a senator, and the Senate is in many respects in opposition to the executive. They're the ones that have the purse strings. They fund the bureaucracy. Who is the president to tell us what can or cannot be done? And so, I would say from the Trump perspective, is this the best thing to be? This is my bigger point. This is the outlines of fights that I think are going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
And is this the one to blow out your political capital on before you're sort of even in office? God. And there's a bit where, one thing I think we got very, very right on the last episode was basically saying, actually, ByteDance taking this to the end is extremely logical and the right thing to do. And it's a reasonable to interpret this as, oh, China won't allow them to sell. This is proof it's a spy app.
Yeah.
That's an understandable position. It's also not necessarily true, because from a sort of like this,
even if we're just a business, it would make sense to say, look, let's go balls to the wall trying to fight this. And then in the event that we're unable to succeed, and TikTok apparently internally really thought they were going to succeed on the First Amendment arguments in court and were pretty shocked that they didn't. Which
that's just bad lawyering
to me.
No, the Supreme Court precedent is pretty clear on
deference
the national
to
security.
Congress and national security questions is not.
No, you're right. It's like a double whammy. Yeah, like there. Yes, even if you go into the First Amendment, rights are not absolute. Now, there's different levels of scrutiny. We sort of talked about that previously, but there is clear precedent in terms of national security. Can Trump, no pun intended, these sort of concerns. So I don't have a clear take, to be honest, other than to outline that I think this is more interesting for broader reasons than just a TikTok sort of ban. This is and that's what I meant about Trump being in like, there is a sense where, and you think about Trump's base, what does Trump's base want? Trump's base wants Trump to do things for them. They think that this is their vote. This is their opportunity to contribute to democracy. And the critique is, actually, we haven't had democracy for a long time because the bureaucrats are in charge. And the whole, again, that's why I tied to the Doge sort of idea and all these bits and pieces. Is the president in charge or is he not? And this is where laws are laws. They also function, the idea of the rule of law is a broad societal agreement. Yeah. And it's very easy to take these discussions, particularly people like us that want to be very analytical, and sort of retreat into the legalese and lose sight of what's happening at a broader, deeper level. And what you end up doing is marginalizing yourself, because you're talking about something that actually no one cares about. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if all that makes sense. I'm not giving clear analysis about what's going to happen to TikTok, XYZ. It's more an observation that I think we're on the leading edge of a really fundamentally different way of thinking about governing. And
just diving into some uncharted waters here.
Well, this is where the FDR thing's really interesting. Like FDR, basically, a lot of the laws FDR passed were not constitutional according to the commonly held understanding of the Constitution in the 1920s. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. And the Supreme Court started to rule them unconstitutional. And he's like, guess what? There's now going to be like 27 Supreme Court justices are going to go on there. And what they do, like to preserve their sort of legitimacy, they like, oh, actually turns out these are constitutional. And you had this real fundamental shift in understanding. A lot of the precedents today that undergird the bureaucracy actually come from those cases of the 1930s and 1940s, which again were 180 degrees different than what came before. So I would just counsel people, be wary of assuming the precedent and the way things operate and your understanding of the world in the 2010s is going to be operative in the future. We could be the future Andrew Sharps and Ben Thompsons could very well be sitting here in 2090 saying, well, you know, Supreme Court precedent says, and you look at what is the date of those precedents, it's from the 2028 TikTok case. XYZ said the president can do XYZ. I don't know.